Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Listen In. Today we are on episode 7, if you can imagine that, and we are talking about Indigenous Storywork as a text for courses on learning and development, often called educational psychology. As you may remember, we have been talking about Indigenous Storywork and all the different ways that we've been working with it, and now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about how we're bringing it into our courses and our teaching practices. So Dr. Nikki has been doing a lot of that, and so I'm going to be asking her some questions today just so she can share a bit about how she does this. My name is Sarah Davidson, and I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Katzie, the Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo peoples. I'm going to pass to Nikki.
Yeah, hi Sarah. I am Nikki, and I am joining you today from the traditional unceded and contemporary territory of the Coquitlam people. And I am a colonizer of Mennonite and Chinese ancestry.
Wonderful, thank you. And so, yes, I will be asking some questions. I will tell you in advance, this is an area that is interesting to me. Nikki and I often have conversations on the phone and talk about a lot of these ideas. So we wanted to share them with you today. So the first question is, how did you come to choose Indigenous Storywork as a text for this course? Because I know that it's not probably a traditional text that you would see in this course. And so if you can just bring us up to speed on how you made that choice.
Right. So when I first started teaching at my university, I was like brand new as a professor, and my first instinct was to try and connect with people who were also teaching the same course as me and who were thinking about how to open decolonizing possibilities. And so I connected with a
Oh,
few of my colleagues.
sorry, pause there. Can I ask you just to talk a little bit about decolonizing possibilities, just in case folks haven't heard that term?
Sure. So, when I think about colonialism, so I have to talk about
Yeah.
colonialism first. I think of Sheila Cote-Meek's definition of colonialism as ongoing culturally embedded violence, could be physical or psychological, against Indigenous people to alienate them from their land. And so, to me, that does not align with my values, and I don't want to reinforce those colonial narratives. So, my work that I try to do in my life and in my professional work is to open decolonizing possibilities. So I don't know as a colonizer what decolonization looks like for me. I can't imagine it because it's such a defining aspect of our culture. And so to me, however, I can think about how to open possibilities and then to continue opening and opening wider, right? And so I think about Graham Smith's work, and he talks about decolonizing possibilities as in part a critique so that we understand what processes or systems or structures are creating those colonial situations, and then this generative reimagination in community with other people. And so this helps us to imagine things beyond sort of what we have always done. And the third piece that he's talked about more recently is the idea of like action, right? So using our hands to he says, show me the blisters on your hands. So like, what are we actually doing to enact these decolonizing possibilities as opposed to just thinking about them in a very sort of theoretical way? So I have kind of taken that up in thinking about like, okay, so here I am, um, instructor for these courses. It's not sort of it's not Indigenous studies, it's not
Mhm.
Indigenous education, it's an education course. It's actually a prerequisite course in our program. And it's about learning and development and how can I open decolonizing possibilities then within this. And so I connected with some of my colleagues that are, similarly minded and are Indigenous teaching and learning specialists at our university. And we created this community of inquiry where we talked about different ways that we could do this. And one of the first things that we actually talked about is a syllabus review. So just to kind of see what people were doing across Canada. And so one thing that we actually learned through that syllabus review is that many courses were using this book,
Mhm.
Educational Psychology by Woolfolk et al., and including our institution. And that in fact, the textbook was actually directing the sequence and the scope of the topics discussed within the courses. And so we thought that this was really interesting. And if the textbook is driving, the discussions within the course, then maybe we need to expand what we're thinking about in terms of the text, in terms of the resources that we're offering students. And so for us, we thought that Indigenous Storywork by Come Him was a good complement, at least, that could give us some direction in terms of local Indigenous perspectives on learning and development. And so it's not specifically positioned. She doesn't position it as a text about learning and development, but I think that in reading it, there's a lot of pieces where she's really talking about those processes that we need to engage with learning in a holistic and complex way.
Mhm.
And so it was really interesting when I kind of came to it with that lens and then thinking about how I can bring it into the course in different ways and through different topics. And so, yeah, and so that's how we kind of came to. So I have now these two as textbooks within my course with a number of other diverse resources, podcasts, videos, and research-based articles as well as sort of our course content. Yeah.
And how have the students responded to that kind of broader perspective on learning and
Yeah,
development?
I think what I have, what I perceive, I mean, students don't always share everything that they're thinking, but generally what I've sort of gotten from them is that this feeling that it's more humanizing, like that are they're feeling seen and understood in a broader way. And so they themselves are not confined to this role of, student as this purely cognitive creature and maybe robot that has nothing going on outside of their lives, right? And so they themselves are understanding themselves as a spiritual, emotional, cognitive, and physical being and understanding how all of those pieces are supporting them in their learning and how they can learn through all of those different, avenues. And then they're thinking about like future students, or some of them are not necessarily going to be teachers, but even in terms of, people they might be mentoring on the job, or if they're coaching in a sport, it's like, oh, okay, like I was really talking to these kids as like cognitive beings, but really like all of this other stuff is going on as well. And so it helps them to be more effective in sort of the things that they're doing to support kids already. And that seems to be the response
Mm.
that I'm feeling. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting the way you talked about looking at all of the different syllabi and recognizing that it was a text driving our approach to pedagogy and content in these courses, progression of what's being prioritized. And I'm wondering if you've found that, no, I think you probably have found that this has shifted your approach to and potentially impacted your instruction. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you see it maybe impacting your own teaching by shifting
Mhm.
texts?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like there's so much I could say. There's so much I could say, Sarah. First of all, like as a teacher, just in addressing your question, I think it's really important to think about if you really understand yourself and your students as more than just cognitive beings, how do you need to show up differently? How
Mm.
do I need to show? That's the question I was asking myself, right? How
Mhm.
do I need to show up differently? Because I know how to learn cognitively. I've gone to school for a really long time.
Yeah.
And my teacher education program, and when I was a teacher, like I supported students, cognitively, and I know how to do that. But what does it mean to learn from, a heart-based perspective? Like I remember when I first encountered that, maybe like 15 years ago, now less than 15 years ago, and I was like, people are like, oh yeah, I want to learn with an open heart and all. I'm like, what does that mean? I didn't even know what it meant.
Mm.
And so I really had to kind of like shift my thinking and develop my understanding of what that actually meant. And I probably am not a good person to articulate that because I'm still feeling very novice at it. And so then thinking about, okay, if I'm not an expert in this kind of learning and knowing, how can I facilitate that for students, right?
Mm.
And so it really shaped how I showed up for students, how I facilitated opportunities for them to reflect and think about themselves as whole beings, as opposed to me telling them, like, this is what you need to do, because this is not a place where I have expertise. But I really want them to have those opportunities to be able to do those things. So that's kind of just sort of a general kind of how I try to show up differently, and thinking about like giving them the benefit of the doubt, or thinking of them as really like whole beings that have lives, and that are not just like cognitive output machines.
And I really appreciate that because I think I remember being in grad school and learning about all these different pedagogies and then being asked to write a paper on it and
Yeah.
feeling like, wait a minute, like I'm learning about all these really great ways to learn, and I'm being asked to just write another paper on it. So I appreciate your willingness to try it out, and what does this look like in my instruction and potentially my assessment, and explore it alongside. I think we're often afraid to do that, so I think it's
Yeah.
wonderful you're able to
Yeah.
do that.
So I have assignments, the second class. Sorry, I got excited there. I have assignments that are really like based in metaphor. So for example, like to me, when I was reading Indigenous story work, like that was one thing that really came out, is this idea of metaphor and thinking of things metaphorically. Even in books like Jigging for Halibut with Ginny, maybe we can think of this in a metaphorical way as well.
Yes.
Right? So metaphor is so key. And so and the other beautiful thing is that it opens up these opportunities for thinking about things in different ways, like, and not only thinking, for engaging in a
Yeah.
more holistic way. And so the metaphor, I think, has really shaped a lot of what we do in terms of learning tasks, in terms of assignments, in terms of how we are thinking about our learning. So that piece has been big.
And I will note
Um,
for our listeners that we will be diving into that deeper in our next episode. So
yes, yes.
stay tuned, if you will, or come back again.
And I frame the course like the first day, last time I taught it, the first day I actually did read one of your books, picture books, just to get them thinking about story. And then our second class is all about how story shapes learning and development. So the stories that we tell around learning and development shape how we're able to then take it up. So if we tell stories about learning and development as purely cognitive, then we're not going to be able to take it up from other sort of aspects of our being, right? Whereas if we tell stories around, learning and development, that everybody is a learner, everybody can learn, and we can all learn through different avenues, then that's going to change who can learn, who is part of this learning community, and how we're going to be able to engage together. So just talking about story, talking about metaphor, and thinking about how these ways of understanding the world can shape how we understand educational psychology.
Yeah, and I think Kwam Kwam Hiam's work does that so beautifully because of her emphasis on this holistic engagement with stories. And so I think it's a beautiful way to expand the field, and I hope that catches on.
I hope so too.
Are there specific stories that you've used that you could share with folks?
Yeah, we have talked about Lady Louse. So this is a story that I have used. It's so Kom Kom Kim talks about, has a little video which we have um linked to in our past videos, but we'll probably put a link on this one as well. And it's quite short and I can show it in class. And then I ask students to go for a walk and think about like, what is this story? How does this story speak to you today? And if they can't walk, like it's an online course. If they can't, sometimes they're caring for kids or there are other reasons they can't leave the house. So I take my phone and I take them outside for a little
Oh.
walk and just have them like really try to reflect on like, what does this mean to me today? So
Mhm.
that's one aspect. There have been a number of times there's been flooding in Abbotsford. There's been kind of things happening where the world just feels really insecure. People feel anxious. And then I often read them The Creator and the Flea,
Mhm.
which is also an Indigenous story work. I believe it's on page 116.
Okay.
And yeah, and so I read them this story and just again, like just asking them to really reflect on how does this speak to you today? And it's just a really such a beautiful story that has had so many lessons for me that I just find it so powerful. And so just telling the story, and then we come back together and I just ask them, you know, if they feel comfortable to share in the chat, like how did the story speak to you? And it's so funny because online it's hard to kind of gauge like people's engagement. But when they're reporting in the chat, like all of these really deep and meaningful things from either story, it's like, wow, like, you know, you can really see the power and potential of using story to develop the whole person.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of your own learning, do you have ideas on what your next steps are in developing the course, just as we wrap up?
Yeah. There are so many steps, right? Because when you're opening decolonizing possibilities, the more you open them, the more you can think about like, hey, I could also then do this, or I could think about that, or maybe I need to go back to my community of inquiry. You know, I really feel like when I feel like, yeah, I'm doing it. This is it. Like that's the time when I'm feeling comfortable that I need to go back and ask more questions and talk to people and gather more ideas and think about how can I expand my practice because I know I'm not there yet.
Mm.
Even if I'm feeling good about my direction, I know I'm not there. So I have to continue that engagement. And to me, you know, we've talked a lot in our community of inquiry about really centering Indigenous epistemologies or ways of knowing. And so, and I am, of course, not Indigenous. And so this is a bit of a struggle for me. I grapple with like, you know, sort of what my responsibilities are, but also like where, you know, I don't want to appropriate and I want to be respectful and engage in a respectful way. And so, you know, those are the things that I'm thinking about, like how to really center Indigenous perspectives without kind of overtaking them and without colonizing them, basically, right? And
Mm.
so this is always kind of my next step. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And as you were talking, I had a new idea. I'm wondering if people want to put in the chat questions that they have or ideas that they have of things that we may talk about in the future. So please let us know. We're
Mhm.
always looking for new ideas and we're very happy to chat with one another. So thank you for joining us today. How
Thank you.